I'd now like to welcome the very Reverend Professor Martyn Percy to the stage for some reflections on putting purpose into practice.
Good afternoon, everybody. Very good to be with you again. And I've been asked to remind you to make sure that you log in to vote, really. That's voting on the debate, not voting for me. I'm not standing for anything. That includes nonsense as well. But I hope you will agree with me that the quality of that debate was absolutely exceptional. And I have to say I've heard a number of Oxford debates in my time at the Oxford Debating Society, and that was absolutely whip smart and would knock any of them into shape. So it was really, really good and outstanding. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I've got some closing reflections on what I've been hearing today. And I particularly want to talk about the way we use words in the practice of business, and in particular the values centred around putting purpose into practice. Like some of you last night, I was honoured to be present at the dinner in Trinity College. And it was lovely to be there, and it's always good food. It did remind me of an apocryphal story some years ago where just unusually the master or the president or the head of the college had decided not to make the closing remarks at the end of dinner, but in fact cede this privilege to a visiting American scholar who was delighted. The American scholar was from Yale, and so got up, mounted the podium, and for the first 20 minutes spent some time talking about youth, Y for youth, and then spent 20 minutes talking about A for ambition, and then spent another 20 minutes talking about L for learning, and then finally 20 minutes talking about E for effort. And this was all received with great politeness and applause, and he sat down and then turned to the president and said, "How did I do?" "Oh, great," said the president. "That was absolutely fabulous. But we are so relieved that you don't come from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." I want to suggest to you that one of the things that's key in understanding putting purpose into practice is taking a look at yourself and taking a look at the organization or the business to which you belong, and understanding something quite fundamental, that there is a difference between humility and humiliation. Most businesses and organizations that I know of spend an enormous amount of time trying to avoid humiliation. It's perfectly understandable. But humility is something to strive for. Both terms are linked to one word, humus or hubris. Humus means being earthed, and the humble person or the humble organization is ultimately grounded, sure of their being, so not above themselves, and therefore they know that they are not above others. No matter what gifts, rank, or status they hold, or whatever they think they are selling or holding. And hubris, in contrast, is self-inflated, puffed up self-perception. It lacks groundedness. It's actually rooted in fear, the fear of humiliation. Grounding is fundamental. As one writer says, humility is that quality that all mature people grow into, a quality where a deep sense of inner dignity and value is palpable to others and brings them solace. It is a fruit, sometimes known as gentleness. It can be misunderstood as false modesty of doing yourself down, and as such it can be quite manipulative in refusing to allow others to express gratitude or admiration for you. But properly humble people are grounded, which means lowly, or on the ground, or on the earth. They are secure in themselves and in touch with their own vulnerability as human beings, but also fully aware of their strengths. Well now, I don't know about you, but humility is something these days that we don't see an enormous amount of. in our political leaders, sometimes in our businesses, and it's something increasingly as I get older, I crave. I long to understand that when people are putting purpose into practice, that they understand that that must be rooted in the valuing of the other, and therefore in service, and therefore attentiveness to what the world wants of you, not necessarily of what you propose to give or inflict upon the world. In my work, both as a theologian and as an ecclesiologist, I often use poetry, because poetry is a much more economic way of expressing things than prose. And one of the most remarkable poems I think we have on humility and service, which I brought for today, comes from UA Fanthorpe. And it's just entitled Atlas. And you don't need to know very much about ancient myths to know that Atlas is the holder-up of the world. It's kind of paradox, isn't it? Standing on ground, but holding up the world. This is what Fanthorpe says about Atlas. There is a kind of love called maintenance, which stores the WD-40 and knows when to use it, which checks the insurance and doesn't forget the milkman, which remembers to plant bulbs, which answers letters, which knows the way the money goes, which deals with the dentists and road fund tax and meeting trains and postcards to the lonely, which upholds the permanently rickety, elaborate structures of living, which is Atlas. And maintenance is the sensible side of love, which knows what time and weather are doing to my brickwork, insulates my faulty wiring, laughs at my dry, rotten jokes, my need for gloss and grouting, which keeps my suspect's edifice upright in the air, as Atlas did the sky. Words are incredibly important, and you've heard a lot of them today. And I want to remind you that it's sometimes very helpful to have some understanding of their history, just slightly seasoned with a hermeneutic of suspicion. We're comfortable about talking about bargains. A bargain for most people these days means haggling and something that you get on the cheap, usually at the expense of others. But drill into the root of that word. It means to tend, to pledge. It means to strike a mutually beneficial agreement. I also think, too, of words we've just heard. Shareholder. What is a shareholder other than a holder of something that is for sharing? How is it that shareholder became something so individual and so beneficial just to the person lucky enough to be able to afford them? What you hold is what you share. And what's the point of holding something if you're not prepared to share it? No point at all, it seems to me. I hail from Christchurch. I've been dean there for 5 years, and we're lucky enough to have an extraordinary history of people who've done amazing things, but often they've not known what they were doing at all at the time. Not at all. I'm reminded of those great words from the essayist Wendell Berry, who says this: "Often I have not known where I was going until I was already there. I've had my share of desires and goals, but my life has come to me, or I have gone to it, mainly by way of mistakes and surprises. Often I have received better than I deserved. Often my fairest hopes have rested on bad mistakes. I am an ignorant pilgrim, crossing a dark valley. And yet for a long time, looking back, I've been unable to shake off the feeling that I have been led. Make of that what you will." Wendell Berry, writing in Jaber Crow. So, the Wesley brothers at Christchurch, founded holiness clubs, which gave birth, in turn, to clubs that proposed thrift and mutuality, which in turn gave birth to what we now call mutual societies, and gave birth, in the end, to what we call building societies. Most people think that mutual societies and building societies are there to make money. Most of our building societies have, in fact, become banks. But building societies were, to begin with, to do exactly what it said on the tin: build society. That was their point. The largest building society left in this country is the Nationwide, and they still have their archives stretching all the way back to their very first saver, a man called Alfred Potts, who was, to begin with, not a homeowner, who was basically illiterate, but saved with the building society in order to buy his own home. It was an open building society, so it carried on working with savers long after they'd paid off their mortgage. Potts lived and died in the house that he bought and had the satisfaction of seeing his building society build his neighbourhood's first open access public library, because building societies invested in people. Those of you dining at Trinity last night may not have noticed, just over the road, an Oxfam gift shop, a charity shop. This too began its life in 1942. It was sponsored, to begin with, by a group of Quakers, socialists, pacifists, and some people from Christchurch, who were just absolutely distraught at the famine in Greece in 1942, caused by the Axis occupation of Greece and the Allied blockade of that country, causing enormous deprivation to the population. The proposition was simple. Poor, bombed-out people could bring their unwanted gifts and various other things to a warehouse in Broad Street opposite Trinity College and give them, donate them, in effect. And people brought all kinds of things. They brought jewellery. They brought things that we now term as regifts. They brought butter. Now, obviously, you can't send butter to Greece. It will turn to grease. But butter was, in those days, a precious commodity in a rationed Britain. The people running that warehouse quickly realised that these things could not be sent to Greece and they would do no good at all. But they could be regifted back to the community and sold on. The world's first proper charity gift shop is on that site still today. Our purpose is often refracted through goodness, and it seems to me that when we actually look at what we're doing these days around purpose and practice, we need to understand that in our humility, there is also a value in what we stand for and a value for what we do. I was immensely moved by the opening this morning from Bruno and Peter and others, and that proposition that knowledge now would be shared and free at the point of delivery. And it reminded me of an old quotation from no less than St. Bernard of Clairvaux, who, writing several hundred years ago, said this: "There are many who seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge. That is curiosity. There are others who desire to know in order that they may themselves be known. That is vanity. Others seek knowledge in order to sell it. That is dishonourable," says Bernard. "But there are some who seek knowledge in order to edify others. And that," says Bernard, "is love." Love, humility, behind purpose and practice, may be much more important than we think. Shareholding, mutual societies, building societies, purpose, prosperity, mutual flourishing. I think in the end that what this conference is about, and what we are about, if you like, as a learning community, is understanding that everything that goes into our minds actually belongs to other people. Education is not about filling a pail, it's about lighting a fire. It's not about filling up with answers, but igniting questions. It's not just about compliance. It's sometimes about teaching you to dissent, to ask awkward questions. It's not just about knowledge, but about wisdom, about character, about virtue, about formation. Not simply about the acquisition of facts, but growing citizens who cultivate civilization. It's not just about achievement, but also about goodness and developing emotional intelligence. So in conclusion, I want to suggest to you that one of the things that really helps us to put purpose into practice is to reflect on the value of how we've been shaped and formed by our education and the benefit that that can do for other people. It was Einstein who said, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." There is, in other words, another agenda. One of my favourite writers of all time is an American, a man called Urban Holmes III. I have no idea why Americans put Roman numerals after their names, but it's something that only you do, but you can explain to me later. There is a PhD thesis in there somewhere for somebody. But Urban T. Holmes III, writing a very short book about Christianity, ends, I think, on a rather poignant note. He says, you know, all religions are basically the same. Love God, love your neighbour, and do your darndest to alleviate the needs of the poor. Everything else, he says, is a question of tactics. I really like that. That may be the only thing that separates the world's great faiths. Tactics. And it reminds me, too, of something that another writer, a long, long time ago, in some of Britain's darkest days during the Second World War, who was trying to say something about what the hope for humanity was. This is Leslie Hunter writing. As the threats of war and the cries of the dispossessed were sounding in our ears, humanity fell into an uneasy sleep. In our sleep, we dreamed that we entered the spacious store in which the gifts of God to humanity are kept, and addressed the angel behind the counter, saying, "We've run out of the fruits of the Spirit. Can you restock us?" The angel said, "No." But we burst out, "In place of violence, terrorism, war, afflictions, injustice, lying, and lust, we need love, joy, peace, integrity, discipline, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. Without these, all will be lost." But the angel behind the counter replied, "We do not stock any fruit here at all, but we can give you some seeds." Seeds is what it's about. Putting purpose into practice, you hold the seeds. In your life, in your personhood, in your organizations and your company. Make sure those seeds are planted in the ground and so grounded so that others may benefit from them, and those seeds might rise up like plants and trees and be the fruit and the sustenance that this our world so badly needs. Thank you.